Hello, everybody, and as always, welcome to TradeGATEHub's morning market update. I am your host, Eliman Dambell, and thank you for taking the time to view the recording of this session. Now, in relation to today, what we have been seeing, of course, this Monday, 28th of June, there has been quite a lot of consolidation around certain markets, so we will essentially do the roll call, starting off with gold. Of course, since gold had that sell off a few weeks ago post FOMC announcement, we have seen some consolidation starting to creep in the market. So just to zoom in and essentially show you and paint the picture of what has been happening. Of course, we saw that decline there closer to the 1900s, a huge sell-off from XAU USD, taking us to that long-term floor of around 1763. Of course, since then we saw over the last week in particular, prices did somewhat consolidate. Now this consolidation came despite speeches from or testimonies from Jerome Powell at Congress, and of course comments from several members of the Fed, essentially stating that inflation potentially couldn't be an issue due to the fact that even consumers believed by this time next year, looking at last week's PCE figures, that inflation in 2022 could potentially slow down, of course, without necessarily triggering the need for the Fed to act sooner than necessary. So you are seeing a lot of you're hearing a lot of voices. We're hearing a lot of voices, a lot of opinions, a lot of stats, but essentially the markets seem to have taken its cue from the Fed a week or so ago, and of course since then we aren't seeing it. It seems to be the markets are waiting for further action. It seems to be the markets are now, and we always say this, guys, from a technical perspective. Of course, you can see the markets trading towards that oversold level, currently at around 34. We see it is oversold, relatively speaking. So a lot of bulls could potentially be lurking. Historically, we have seen a lot of reversals taking place at this area, but for now, it does seem like it is toeing the line. It may continue to trade on that line, and we may see a breakdown potentially heading towards the 1734 areas. But for the most part, a lot of traders are optimistic from a bullish sense that due to the fact, especially on the daily time frame, if this is showing to be oversold, we may be in store for a potential reversal. Yes, we have seen it before, but for the most part, it tends to come above 1786. And let's just remove some of these horizontal lines just to get a bit more clarity. If you look above that level there, that's where we historically have seen the bulls. So potentially there could be a rally taking us back towards the 1840s, potentially, depending on the type of news which is released. And of course, in terms of this week, we do have some data coming out of the US. So of course, from your own perspective, keep up to date with this, looking at the likes of TradeGATEHub for economic news and releases and things of that nature, and you will be in a position of potentially being able to catch the next move. The only thing I'm seeing is, looking at the momentum, the moving averages are still positioned downwards. You see that blue 25 EMA essentially pointing downwards as well, looking to cross over with the 50 there in yellow. So if that momentum continues similar to what we saw it do earlier on in the year, I wouldn't be surprised if the price of gold continues to drop, potentially even trying to find that floor there of around 1677. So it's one to look out for. A huge move as far as, I don't know, bearish action has already taken place. Could there be another? That's the question mark. That's what a lot of traders are waiting to see. Next up, looking at Bitcoin. Guys, it's been an interesting one, and my position on this hasn't changed. Bitcoin, I believe, will consolidate for a while, similar to what we're seeing with gold. However, I believe with Bitcoin, after such a huge drop, look, Bitcoin dropped in value by 50%. Pretty much from month to month, what was it, May to June, Bitcoin dropped 50% in its value. And after such a drop, you traditionally will see consolidation. And now we are seeing Bitcoin find new consolidation. I think we're finding a new home for cryptos. I'd say between that 10K range, let's say 32 to 42K. You are going to see somewhat of a back and forth in that level there. But I do believe long term we may potentially see cryptos rally again. Looking at the moving averages as well, even though we are seeing the upwards crossover, downwards crossover, somewhat intertwining, which somewhat confirms the consolidation, somewhat confirms the uncertainty, but there is still the opportunity for eventually a further rise, especially if you zoom out and you see the fact that historically a lot of bulls have lived in this area before. A lot of bulls have taken affirmative action to lift prices at this area. You're probably looking at the RSI, also seeing that 42 resistance was somewhat broken, but not enough to really entice the bulls to get in there even further. And if it does cross over, let's say 45, I'd say 45, 46, it would have to be somewhere around there, probably more 45, to entice the bulls to try and get it to 50 to 49. And I believe from a pricing perspective, you're probably looking at around 38K or so if that were to be the case. 38, 39K. So if we do happen to get to 49 as far as the RSI, you're probably going to see prices trading somewhere around this resistance there. I'll probably call that a false breakout. So probably around 39K. But then thereafter, you are going to have the same questions. What next? And again, you do see some uncertainty there. So I believe for Bitcoin for now, we are going to see some uncertainty. You have crackdowns coming from China in terms of Bitcoin mining. Of course, Elon Musk hasn't ruled out Tesla reusing cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin in particular as a means of transaction. But for now, it does seem like it is a wait and see. It is more a case of hopefulness for Bitcoiners in their pursuit of seeing higher crypto prices. So it's definitely an interesting one to keep an eye out on over the next few weeks. And guys, if you remember, GBP USD a few weeks ago. A few years ago would be a long time to project the market, but a few weeks ago, during the morning market updates, we were looking at cable and we saw the potential for this to head lower. Of course, since then we see that move. Of course, initially we believed the floor 139, it hit that, but it broke that. It continued to the further floor last week, of course, as a result of the Fed. So we are seeing dollar taking a stronger stance as far as trying to increase its strength against other G7 currencies. So we see it hit that 137 level. The question is, are we heading to 135? The question is, are we heading to 135 for of course, Brits abroad, let's say in the US? Probably that isn't a situation you would want to see. But if you look at it realistically, that probably is where we are heading. You are looking at the moving averages. Let's just zoom in there. You see that crossover, you see that 25 midterm approaching that long-term 50 EMA. Of course, some of you can look at the 200-day moving average and 100-day moving average for longer term. That if I like to keep it 10, 25, 50. But it does look like we could be heading to 136, especially looking at the fact that we are nearing a resistance. There are quite a lot of bears in this area, but also looking at the RSI there at 41. Just below that 43 resistance. Could it potentially head lower towards around 25? If that is the case, if that does happen, of course, it wouldn't be a surprise to any of us to see a cable trading around 136. So it is one to consider. It is one to pay attention to. So let's wait and see how that story somewhat progresses. So guys, we've looked at cable, we've looked at Bitcoin, we've looked at gold. There's probably two or three more that we need to look at before we leave the session. Starting off with S&P 500, record high after record high after record high, and I think this is coming off the back of stronger Data from the US, of course, stronger performance. Even the likes of the likes of Nike, last week we saw hitting a record high as far as its overall valuation or earnings per share. Grew around revenue grew around I believe it was a projection of around $50 billion for 2022, and of course those estimates saw shares in Nike climb to their record high intraday. They climbed around 15%, I believe, on Thursday. So you are seeing a lot of these storylines take place, and of course as a result the S&P 500 is being the beneficiary. Guys, if you remember again a few weeks ago, my target was the S&P was going to hit that big round number of 4,300. We're getting closer and closer. We're getting closer and closer. I believe that is the target, especially considering the fact that 61 on the RSI, 70 seems to be that resistance. I believe it's going to absolutely fly through that 4,300 level, settle somewhere in between. We may see some consolidation. If you're looking at 63, however, the last time, even though we have 70 there, 63 last time did give us some resistance. So the closer we get to this, of course, we're currently around, let's say, 62. The closer we get to 63, the question will be, is it able to breach that level and surpass it, or will we see some lower forms of consolidation taking place at this earlier level? So it's an interesting one to look forward to, but long term the momentum is upwards. I think with the S&P, we do know it is an upwards ascending market, so it will be interesting to see how long that can continue for. Speaking of ascending markets, guys, what did I tell you? And luckily for me, my hand can remain intact. My hand can remain intact. And the reason I say this is a few weeks ago, it seems I'm saying everything a few weeks ago. A few weeks ago, I said to you, I'll damn near cut my hand off if crude oil does not reach $75 a barrel. And thankfully, I'm able to not have to keep that promise, because as you have seen the rally over the last few weeks, of course, I think closer to the end of this week you may start to see some reversals potentially, but I do believe we may see this attempt to continue ascending, maybe even towards, let's say, those 83 levels. But for now, I believe 75, maybe 77. But then, of course, OPEC will have its meeting 1st of June, which of course this Thursday. So I believe we may see some interesting actions taking place as a result. So it will definitely be good for you guys to keep abreast of this on TradeGATEHub. Listen to the likes of Mike B. Dell talk about potentially, of course, looking at stocks as well. But asking these guys questions, asking myself questions on what you believe a potential increase in supply from OPEC could do for demand, because we are seeing I would say an oversupply. Of course, we saw inventory somewhat fall last week as well, but you are seeing a huge level of demand, and the levels in which production are now unable to match up. So could that potentially happen? And last but not least, I just quickly wanted to look at dollar yen, in which you are seeing another false breakout, but not too much to report there with dollar yen. Again, the yen is somewhat trying to consolidate at this level, which seems to be somewhat of a false breakout area if you're looking at around 110. So we saw what happened at 110 there in the past. Could we see such action take place again with another sell-off? Looking at the RSI, you could say it is a resistance area. It is closer to being overbought. Potentially speaking, if it breaks out of that level, we could see this stretch even higher. Could we see this attempt to, apologies for the longer term chart there, but could we see this attempt to go to 112? So these are all of the questions that we will potentially look to answer over the next few days. Of course, in order to have these answers for yourself, do stay tuned to TradeGATEHub, and we will be able to potentially bring them to you. So guys, Eliman Dambell as always, and I will see you at the next session, live session on Wednesday. All the best, guys. Enjoy the rest of your days. Take care. Bye-bye.